Admiral Minho stood alone on the observation deck of the UEFS Indomitable, watching the stars twinkle in the darkness of space. The great ship hummed beneath his feet with the sound of thousands of people working, living, and hoping. He was a tall man with gray touching his black hair, and his face showed the marks of someone who had spent many years making hard decisions. Today would be one of the hardest. The message had arrived 3 hours ago. It came from Kael'thor, the leader of the Velthar coalition, and the words were simple, but terrifying. Surrender the colony on Meridian Prime within 24 hours, or face complete destruction. No discussion, no second chances, just surrender or die. Minho pulled up the live feed from the planet below. Meridian Prime was beautiful in a way that made his chest hurt. Green forests covered most of the land, and blue oceans stretched across the equator. For 3 years, humans had built a life there alongside the Velthar. Scientists, farmers, engineers, and families all working together, building something new, a future that seemed possible. But now, that future was ending. "Sir," a voice came from behind him. Minho turned to see Dr. HFY enter the observation deck. She was a small woman with intelligent eyes that had been red from crying. HFY was a xenobiologist, someone who studied alien life and culture. She had spent the last 3 years on Meridian Prime, living among the Velthar, learning their ways and building trust. She had been the bridge between two species. "The Council is in crisis," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "They do not believe this is real. They think it is some kind of mistake or misunderstanding." Minho gestured for her to stand beside him at the window. Together they looked down at the world below. "Is it a misunderstanding?" he asked quietly. "No," HFY whispered. "I lived with these people for 3 years, Admiral. I attended their ceremonies. I ate their food. I learned their language and their history. They told me about how the crystals beneath Meridian Prime were sacred, holy to their people. They said these crystals had memories, that they held the voice of their ancestors." She paused, her hands becoming fists. "I told them about Earth, about our families, about how humans dream too." "And?" Minho prompted. "And they said they understood. They said that sacred things could be shared, that belief systems could live together, that humanity and the Velthar could be something new." HFY's voice broke. "They lied, Admiral. Everything was a lie." Before Minho could respond, an alarm sounded on the bridge. Red lights began flashing. A young officer named Dawu ran onto the observation deck, his face pale with fear. "Admiral, we are receiving new information from the surface. The Velthar government is ordering all humans to leave the planet immediately. Military forces are moving into position around all human settlements. They have given a deadline of 6 hours. Minho felt something cold move through his body. This was no longer just a threat. This was the beginning of an invasion. He closed his eyes for a moment, remembering the children he had seen in the videos from the colony. He remembered reading the names of some of them in reports. He thought about families eating dinner together, not knowing that their world was about to end. "Lieutenant Dawu," Minho said, his voice steady and calm, "send an immediate evacuation order to all human personnel on Meridian Prime. Full emergency protocols. I want every available transport heading there now." "Yes, sir." Dawu ran back toward the bridge. HFY grabbed Minho's arm. "Admiral, we need to try talking to them again. Let me send a message to Kael'thor. I know him. I have relationships with several members of the Council. Perhaps we can still—" "No," Minho said gently. He placed his hand over hers. "HFY, I respect your knowledge and your hope. But this is not about communication anymore. This is about survival. These people have already made their choice." In the colony below, things were moving quickly. Captain Jiwoo commanded the civilian transport called the Aurora's Hope. He was a good man who had volunteered to lead the evacuation mission 3 years ago, never expecting to actually have to use it. Now he stood in the docking bay of the settlement, watching as people rushed toward the transport with whatever they could carry. Children held their parents' hands. Elderly people moved slowly, stunned by the speed of everything. Families that had built homes and lives were now leaving with only what fit in their arms. Ji-woo's second officer, a young woman named Min-soo, approached him with bad news written all over her face. "Captain, we can fit about 50,000 people on this ship if we pack the cargo decks. But there are 80,000 humans on this planet." Ji-woo felt his stomach drop. "How long will it take to load?" 3 hours if we push everything. But the Velthar military is moving closer. I have sensors showing at least 5 warships heading this way. Ji-woo looked around at the panicking crowd. He thought about the children. He thought about what would happen if they did not get away in time. He made a decision. "Load everyone we can fit," he said firmly. "I will contact the Admiral and let him know that we need a military escort. These people will get home alive. That is an order." Back on the Indomitable, Admiral Min-ho was receiving all these reports and more. The situation was getting worse by the minute. The Velthar were not just telling humans to leave anymore. They were actively moving military forces to prevent the evacuation. It was clear now that this was not about negotiation or peace. This was about erasing humanity's presence from Meridian Prime, no matter what the cost. Commander Tae-sung, who controlled the weapon systems of the Indomitable, approached Min-ho on the bridge. He was a serious man who had never questioned an order in his entire career. "Admiral, the Velthar are blocking the evacuation route. If we do not do something, they will catch the transport ships. What are your orders?" Min-ho looked at the tactical display. He could see the situation clearly. The human military was powerful, but attacking the Velthar would mean open war. It would mean crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. It would mean that peace was officially over. He thought about the children on Meridian Prime. He thought about the families trying to escape. He thought about the 50,000 people who had built a life and now had to run with nothing. He thought about his duty as a military commander and his duty as a human being. Then he made the choice that would change everything. "Redirect all starboard batteries," he said quietly. "Prepare to intercept those Velthar destroyers." The bridge became very quiet. Everyone understood what this meant. "Fire when ready," Admiral Min-ho said, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The first volley of weapons fire tore across the darkness of space like angry lightning. 2 Velthar destroyers exploded in brilliant orange flames that bloomed outward and then faded to nothing. The crew of the Indomitable stood frozen for just a moment, understanding that history was being made around them. Humanity had fired first. Humanity had chosen war. Commander Tae-sung's voice was steady as he reported the results of the first attack. "Direct hit on both targets, sir. 1 destroyer is completely destroyed. The second is damaged but still operational." He paused, then added, "The Velthar are returning fire." Admiral Min-ho watched the tactical display with calm focus. The battle was unfolding in 3 dimensions, with ships moving through space at impossible speeds. To most people, it would have looked like chaos. But to someone like Min-ho, who had spent his entire life studying military strategy, it was like a deadly dance where every step mattered. "Full power to forward shields," he ordered. "Position us between the evacuation transports and the remaining Velthar warships. I want fighter squadrons launched now." The Indomitable shook violently as weapons fire struck its shields. The lights flickered for a moment. Min-ho did not move. He did not hold on to anything for support. He simply stood there, looking at the display, watching his plan come to life. Below on Meridian Prime, Captain Ji-woo was racing against time. The Aurora's hope was loading people as fast as possible, but there were still thousands waiting. The dock was chaos and order mixed together. People pushed forward, but not violently, not yet. There was still hope, still the belief that everyone would make it. Then the sky above the colony lit up with weapons fire. Ji-Woo watched from the transport's command center as the battle began. He saw the Indomitable move into position above the planet, its massive shape blocking some of the Velthar weapons fire. He understood immediately what Admiral Minho was doing. The Admiral was using his ship as a shield for the evacuations. "Load everyone now," Ji-Woo said into the communication system. "Priority to children and elderly. Move people up the ramps. Move!" The evacuation workers began moving faster. Families were separated into groups. Mothers held children. Fathers helped elderly relatives. Teachers kept groups of school children together. The dock became even more crowded, with people filling every available space. Another explosion rocked the settlement. This one was close, very close. The power went out for several seconds. When it came back on, a small section of the dock was simply gone, replaced by a gaping hole that opened to the sky outside. 7 people had been standing there. Now there were none. A woman named So-Jin had been waiting to board with her husband, who was a pilot. She saw the explosion. She heard the sound of the disaster. For a moment, she hoped that maybe her husband was safe elsewhere. Then she saw his body fall slowly through the opening to the sky, spinning as it fell. She opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came out. Ji-Woo saw her frozen look. He saw her staring upward at the sky. He made a command decision. "Get her on the ship," he said to one of his officers. "Get everyone on this ship now. We are leaving in 5 minutes, whether we are full or not." Above them, the battle was becoming even more intense. The Indomitable had destroyed 2 more Velthar vessels, but the ship itself was taking serious damage. Its shields were failing. Its armor was torn in multiple places, but it was still moving, still positioning itself to protect the evacuation transports. Young Lieutenant Daewoo was in the weapons control room, working alongside Commander Tae-sung. Daewoo was only 23 years old, and this was his first real combat situation. He had expected to feel fear, but instead he felt a strange clarity. He understood what they were doing. They were saving people. Thousands of lives depended on their ability to keep the Velthar weapons at bay. "More power to the forward shields," Tae-sung shouted. "We need to hold position for another 5 minutes." Daewoo worked the controls with surprising calm. He had trained for this his entire life. Now it was actually happening. The computer display showed him the Velthar weapons targeting vectors. He predicted where they would fire and positioned the shields accordingly. It was like a deadly game of chess played at the speed of light. Another hit shook the Indomitable. Alarms sounded throughout the ship. Several crew members fell to the ground. One young woman hit her head against the control panel and did not get back up. But the shields held. On the tactical display, Admiral Minho could see that the evacuation transports were filling up. The Aurora's Hope was nearly full now. 2 smaller transports named the Victory and the Hope's Echo were also loading passengers. The Velthar were trying desperately to move past the Indomitable to reach those transports, but the human warship would not let them through. Minho understood the Velthar strategy. They wanted to capture or destroy the transports to prevent the humans from escaping. If they could do that, they would eliminate the human presence and send a message to the rest of the galaxy that the Velthar could not be challenged. What they did not understand was that humanity had just decided to challenge them anyway. "Launch all remaining fighters," Minho ordered. "I want a defensive perimeter around those transports. Nothing gets through." The fighter squadrons launched from the Indomitable's bays like angry wasps. They were smaller and faster than the Velthar warships, and they were piloted by humans who were suddenly fighting for the lives of thousands of people below. The fighters weaved between the larger ships, their weapons targeting engines and weapons systems on the Velthar vessels. Down on the planet, Captain Ji-Woo finally gave the order to launch. The Aurora's Hope had 50,000 people packed inside. There were still thousands waiting on the dock. Jiwoo knew he could not save everyone this time. The knowledge sat heavy in his chest like a stone. But as the transport lifted off, something unexpected happened. 3 human fighter pilots, seeing that the Aurora's Hope was departing, turned their craft and covered the transport's ascent. They flew protectively alongside it, their weapons ready for any Velthar ship that dared approach. The 2 smaller transports also launched, each carrying thousands of people. Together, the 3 evacuation ships rose up through the atmosphere, leaving behind the world they had built and the people they could not save. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Admiral Minho watched the 3 transports break through the planet's atmosphere and begin their journey toward the jump gate that would take them to safety. It was working. It was actually working. But the battle was far from over. The Velthar were angry now. Their initial attacks had failed. Thousands of humans had escaped. Their pride was wounded. They began attacking with even more fury, sending more weapons fire at the Indomitable. The human warship was being hit repeatedly. Its shields were down to 20% power. Fires were breaking out in multiple sections of the ship. Dr. Haiwan was in the medical bay when the ship shook violently from another hit. She and her team of doctors were treating the wounded, the crew members who had been injured in the battle. She worked quickly, moving from patient to patient, trying to save lives while the ship shook around her. A young man with severe burns was brought in. Haiwan recognized him as one of the communications officers. She started treating him immediately, using all her medical training. But even as she worked, she wondered if it was enough. She wondered if saving this one man was worth the cost of the battle. She wondered if humanity had made a terrible mistake. Then she thought about the 50,000 people on the evacuation transports. She thought about the children, and she kept working. Admiral Minho made another decision. The Indomitable could not hold its position much longer. The shields were failing. The ship's engines were damaged. If they stayed here much longer, the Velthar would destroy them and then resume hunting the evacuation transports. All fighters, retreat to the ship, he ordered. We are jumping to hyperspace. Full power to engines. The Indomitable began moving away from Meridian Prime, its engines leaving trails of light behind it. The Velthar pursued, firing weapons that scored hits on the retreating human ship, but the Indomitable was moving faster, pulling away into the darkness of space. Behind them, the 3 evacuation transports continued their journey toward the jump gate and safety. The first chapter of humanity's fight for survival among the stars was ending. The battle was over, but something more important had just begun. The bridge of the Indomitable was a study in controlled disaster. Alarms were still sounding. Smoke drifted through the air. Several displays were dark or showing only flickering images. Admiral Minho stood in the center of it all. His uniform torn and dirty, but his mind completely clear and focused. Commander Tae-sung approached the Admiral, moving carefully across the shaking deck. Sir, we have escaped the immediate battle zone. The Velthar fleet is holding position around Meridian Prime. We are receiving damage reports from all sections. We have sustained significant casualties. Minho nodded slowly. He had expected this. War always came with a cost. The question was whether that cost was worth what they had gained. He thought about the 50,000 people on the evacuation transports. He thought about Captain Jiwoo leading them to safety. He thought about the families that would live because of what his crew had just done. Casualty numbers? He asked. 347 dead, Tae-sung replied quietly. Another 512 wounded. Multiple hull breaches. Engines operating at 60%. Weapon systems partially offline. Shield generators are completely fried. Minho absorbed this information without showing any emotion. 347 people. He had known some of them. He had eaten with some of them in the ship's mess. He had seen their families in photographs they kept in their quarters. And now they were gone, but 50,000 people were alive because of their sacrifice. A communication officer called out from her station. "Admiral, the evacuation transports have just reached the jump gate. They are beginning their transition to hyperspace. All 3 ships are confirming safe passage." A pause. "They made it, sir. They're safe." Something in the atmosphere on the bridge changed. The crew members looked at each other. They had done it. They had actually done it. "Good," Minho said simply. "Now we need to think about what comes next." He moved to the tactical display and studied the positions of the Velthar fleet. The aliens had withdrawn from active pursuit, but they were not leaving. They were holding position around Meridian Prime, consolidating their forces, waiting. Kyle would be analyzing what had just happened. The Velthar leader would be thinking about his next move. Dr. Hei-Wan emerged from the medical bay after several hours of treating the wounded. She looked exhausted, her clothes stained with blood and other things she did not want to think about. She made her way to the observation deck, needing to see something other than death and injury. Admiral Minho found her there, standing alone, looking out at the stars. He did not say anything at first. He simply stood beside her, giving her space to process what had happened. "I told them we could live together," Hei-Wan said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I spent 3 years building that relationship. I believed in it." She turned to look at Minho. How could they do this? How could they value those crystals more than the people I brought to their planet? Minho considered his words carefully before speaking. "Because we assumed the Velthar saw value in what we were building together. But we made an assumption about their motivations. We thought they shared our values. We thought they saw humans as people worth protecting. We were wrong." "So what now?" Hei-Wan asked. "Do we keep running? Do we eventually let them have everything they want?" Minho looked out at the stars. He thought about the question she had asked, and he realized that it was time to ask a different question entirely. "Now," he said, "we decide what kind of species we are going to be." He turned away from the window and headed toward the communications center. Hei-Wan followed him, curious about what he was planning. On the bridge, Minho took a seat in the command chair. The chair felt different now. It felt heavier, more important. Every eye in the bridge was on him, waiting to see what their admiral would do next. "Open a communication channel to the Velthar fleet," Minho commanded. "Direct channel to Kael'thor. I want to broadcast this on all frequencies." The communication officer looked surprised, but she worked quickly. Within seconds, they had a signal. The Velthar would be receiving Minho's message now. The entire bridge held its breath. Admiral Minho appeared on the communication display, his image being sent through space to the Velthar vessels. He did not look angry. He did not look defeated. He looked like a man who had made a decision and accepted the consequences of that decision. "Kael'thor," Minho began, his voice steady and clear. "You came to Meridian Prime seeking resources. You believed that we would run at the first sign of your military strength. You attacked our civilians, thinking that would make us surrender faster." He paused, letting those words sink in. "You were wrong about humans." On the Velthar flagship, Kael'thor watched this message with growing fury. The insectoid alien's multiple eyes focused on the human admiral's image. Around him, his commanders whispered nervously. They had won the battle for Meridian Prime, but they had not achieved what they wanted most. They had not destroyed the human evacuation fleet. Minho continued speaking. 50,000 of my people are now safe. They are beyond your reach. You cannot hurt them. You cannot erase them from existence." He leaned forward slightly. "And now you face a choice. You can continue this conflict, and I promise you that every single ship in your fleet will be reduced to atoms before we allow you to threaten another human life. Or you can withdraw Accept that humanity is not a species you can bully, and live with that knowledge. The silence that followed was profound. Everyone understood what was happening. The human admiral was making a demand backed up by nothing but will and conviction. Lieutenant Dawu, standing at his station, felt a strange feeling move through him. He realized that he was watching leadership in its purest form. The admiral was not lying. He was not exaggerating. He was simply stating a truth about humanity that the Velthar had not yet learned. Young Captain Min Su, who was in the evacuation fleet heading toward human space, received a copy of the broadcast. She was sitting in the cargo bay of the Aurora's Hope, which was now packed with 50,000 frightened, tired, but alive people. She understood what Admiral Minho was doing. He was buying them time. He was creating a threat large enough that the Velthar would have to think twice about pursuing them. It was a magnificent bluff, backed by a ship that was barely holding together and weapons systems that were severely damaged. But it was also a declaration of something important. Humanity was no longer asking permission to exist. Humanity was demanding respect. Dr. Hei-Wan watched Minho send the message, and something shifted in her understanding. She had spent 3 years trying to be a bridge between humanity and the Velthar. She had failed. But in failing, she had learned something important. Peace could only exist between beings that respected each other, and respect could only come after strength had been established. The Velthar had needed to learn that humans were strong. They had learned it today. On the Velthar flagship, Kael'thor received more information from his commanders. They reported that the human vessel's shields were down. Its weapons were partially offline. By all logical measures, the Velthar could destroy the Indomitable if they chose to attack again. But Kael'thor was beginning to understand something that the human admiral had already known. Logic was not the only thing that mattered in war. Will mattered. Determination mattered. The willingness to sacrifice everything for a cause mattered. And the humans had demonstrated that they possessed all of these things. "Do not attack," Kael'thor ordered, surprising everyone on his bridge. "Maintain current position. We will monitor their movements." It was not a surrender. It was not even a formal ceasefire. But it was a pause. It was a moment where both sides stepped back and understood that what had started as a simple conflict over resources had become something much more complex. Admiral Minho sat back in his command chair and finally allowed himself to feel the exhaustion that had been waiting for him. Around him, the crew of the Indomitable began to process what had just happened. They had fought one of the most dangerous battles of their lives, and they had survived. But the question was not whether they would survive today. The question was whether humanity would survive tomorrow and all the tomorrows that would follow. The Velthar had not retreated. They were still there, still watching, still waiting. Minho understood that this battle was won, but the larger conflict was just beginning. The Velthar would be analyzing what had happened. They would be considering their options. They would be planning their next move. And somewhere in the depths of space, 50,000 human refugees were traveling toward home, carrying with them the knowledge that their species had finally learned how to fight for what mattered most. The observation deck of the Indomitable had become Admiral Minho's private thinking space. He stood there for hours, watching the Velthar fleet in the distance. They were still there, still waiting, still holding their position around Meridian Prime. It was like 2 boxers in a ring, both bruised and tired, neither willing to make the first move. But Minho knew that waiting would not solve the problem. The Velthar needed to understand something more than just military strength. They needed to understand that humanity would not back down, that humanity could not be intimidated, and that humanity had something the Velthar did not possess. Young Lieutenant Dawu found the Admiral standing at the window. The young officer had been promoted to captain for his outstanding work during the battle, and he carried himself with new confidence. He approached carefully, as if walking on thin ice. Sir, Dawu began, I have analyzed the Velthar fleet composition. Commander Tai Sung asked me to report these findings to you. Minho turned to face the young captain. What have you found? Sir, the Velthar fleet is not unified. There are 5 different command structures represented among their vessels. Under normal circumstances, they would be operating as a single force under Kelthor's command. But our sensors are picking up what appears to be communication conflicts between the different groups. Some of their ships are receiving different orders than others. This was exactly what Minho had hoped for. He had gambled that the Velthar coalition was not as solid as it appeared on the surface. Now it seemed his gamble was paying off. Good work, Captain, Minho said, his mind already working on the next stage of his strategy. Tell Commander Tai Sung to begin monitoring those communication frequencies. I want to know what they are saying to each other. Dawu saluted and left. As he walked back toward the bridge, he thought about what was happening. He was starting to understand how Admiral Minho thought. The Admiral was not just fighting a battle, he was fighting a war of ideas, a war of understanding, a war of forcing the enemy to question their own unity and purpose. On the Velthar flagship, Kelthor was indeed in the middle of serious conflict with his own commanders. General Shakri, who controlled the largest portion of the Velthar forces, was questioning whether continuing to pursue humanity was worth the cost. We have achieved our primary objective, Shakri argued, his voice making a sound like wind moving through dead trees, which was how Velthar language translated to human hearing. We have secured Meridian Prime and the crystal resources beneath it. The humans have evacuated. Why do we risk more of our ships? Kelthor's many eyes flashed with anger. Because the humans must learn that they cannot defy the Velthar coalition. If we allow them to leave unpunished, other species will think they can do the same. But we did punish them, Shakri countered. We destroyed their settlements. We forced their evacuation. We demonstrated our military power. What more do you want, Kelthor? I want their total surrender, Kelthor hissed. I want them on their knees, begging for mercy that I will not grant. Shakri was quiet for a moment. Then he made a decision that would change the course of the coming conflict. I cannot support that objective. My forces are withdrawing from this operation. We are returning to coalition territory. If you wish to continue pursuing the humans, you will do so without our support. Kelthor stood up, his form towering over all the others on the bridge. He was about to respond when alarms suddenly began sounding. One of the Velthar destroyers in the outer perimeter of the fleet had been attacked, but not by the humans. The attack was coming from somewhere else entirely. An unknown faction of Velthar had turned on Kelthor's forces. Back on the Indomitable, Admiral Minho was analyzing the same reports. The Velthar fleet was in chaos. One section was attacking another. It was a civil war breaking out in real time, and Minho understood why. General Shakri was using the conflict as an excuse to overthrow Kelthor's authority. Open a communication channel to General Shakri, Minho ordered. Encrypted, and use channel 7. I want to speak to him privately. The communication officer looked confused. Sir, we do not have any established communication protocols with General Shakri. How would we know he even wants to speak with you? He does, Minho said simply. Trust me. Open the channel. Dr. Haywan was in the medical bay when she received a message to report to the Admiral's private quarters. She found Minho standing alone, reviewing star charts and tactical information on a display screen. Doctor, Minho greeted her without looking up from the display, I need your expertise. What do you know about Velthar internal politics? Haywan considered the question. She had spent 3 years studying their culture. They are organized by bloodlines and military achievement. A leader maintains power through demonstrations of strength and the support of their subordinates. If a subordinate believes they can do better, they can challenge the leader. And what happens in a challenge? Usually the stronger leader wins and the weaker one is either killed or stripped of power. HFY paused. Why are you asking this? Because I believe we are about to witness a Velthar power struggle, and I need to understand it to make the right decision about how we respond. The communication channel opened. Admiral Minho was suddenly face-to-face with General Shakri, the towering insectoid warrior. The general's many eyes focused on Minho, with an expression that was impossible for a human to read. "Admiral Minho," Shakri said, his voice carrying strange harmonics through the translation system. "I am aware of what you are doing. You are trying to use our internal conflicts to your advantage." "Yes," Minho replied simply. He saw no point in lying. "But I am also offering something more valuable than that." "And what would that be?" "Peace," Minho said. "A true peace, not the false understanding that existed before. Your species wanted the crystals on Meridian Prime. You can have them. Humans do not want them. What we want is to be left alone to exist without threat. I am offering you a ceasefire, backed by this promise. If you and your forces withdraw from Velthar space and leave humanity alone, we will not pursue you further. But if you continue to pursue us, or if Kael'thor attempts to attack us again, you will answer to the entire human military force." "Your ship is damaged," Shakri observed. "You are not in a position to make threats." "You are correct," Minho agreed. "But that is not a threat. That is a statement of fact. We are prepared to live or die for our people's freedom. The question is whether you are willing to do the same for yours." General Shakri was silent for a very long time. Then he made his own decision. "Kael'thor is dead," Shakri announced. "My forces have removed him from power. The coalition will honor the ceasefire you have proposed. Humans will not be pursued. Humans will not be attacked. This is my command." Minho felt something inside him relax. It was over. Not completely, not permanently, but for now, the immediate threat had passed. "Thank you, General," Minho said. "You have made the right choice." "I have made the choice that my people can survive," Shakri replied. "That is all any leader can do." The communication ended. On the bridge of the Indomitable, the crew erupted in cheers. They had done it. They had actually done it. Humanity had faced down an alien empire and lived to tell about it. Dr. HFY stood in the Admiral's quarters with tears running down her face. She was thinking about all the people who had died to achieve this moment. She was thinking about Sojin, who had lost her husband when the Velthar attacked the colony. She was thinking about the hundreds of crew members on the Indomitable who had made the ultimate sacrifice. "The cost," she whispered. "The cost was so high." "Yes," Minho agreed. "But the alternative was genocide. The Velthar would have hunted down every human they could find, erased our presence from that entire region of space. This cost was heavy, but it was lighter than the other option." Lieutenant, now Captain Dawu, was receiving his new assignment. He would help coordinate the recovery efforts on the Indomitable and organize the debriefing with the evacuation transports now that it was safe to do so. Young Captain Min Su on the Aurora's Hope received confirmation that the Velthar were no longer pursuing them. She stood in the ship's command center and looked out at the 50,000 faces of the people she had helped save. They were tired, frightened, traumatized, but they were alive. And somewhere in the darkness of space, Admiral Minho understood that he had not just won a battle. He had made a statement about who humanity was and what humanity was willing to do to protect itself. The question was no longer whether humanity could survive among the stars. The question was what kind of civilization they would become. The journey home was nothing like anyone on the evacuation transports had imagined. They had left their homes with almost nothing. They had watched people they loved die. They had experienced the terror of knowing that an entire civilization wanted them erased from existence. Now, traveling through hyperspace toward Earth, they had nothing but time to think about what had happened. Captain Jiwoo stood in the command center of the Aurora's Hope, looking at the numbers that kept him awake at night. 50,000 survivors. But 80,000 humans had been living on Meridian Prime. That meant 30,000 people had been left behind. Some had died in the initial attacks. Others were unable to reach the evacuation transports in time. Still others had chosen to stay, hoping against hope that the Velthar would negotiate if not all humans left. Those people were still there. Those people would never come home. In the medical bay of the Aurora's Hope, a woman named So-Jin sat on a bed, staring at nothing. Her husband had been a pilot. She had seen him fall from the sky during the evacuation. She had a 3-year-old daughter named Mira who kept asking when Daddy was coming home. So-Jin did not know how to answer that question. A nurse named Jisoo approached So-Jin with food. "You need to eat," Jisoo said gently. "Your daughter needs you to be strong." "I do not feel strong," So-Jin whispered. "I feel like someone cut out a piece of my heart and left it on that planet." Jisoo sat down beside her. She understood. Her own husband had been killed during the evacuation. Many people on the transport had lost loved ones. They were all walking around carrying grief that would take years to process, if it ever could be processed at all. On the Indomitable, the situation was different, but equally heartbreaking. The wounded were recovering slowly. 347 crew members had died in the battle, and their bodies were being honored according to human military tradition. Each morning, the crew gathered to acknowledge the names of the fallen. Admiral Minho attended every memorial service. He felt a deep responsibility for each life that had been lost. These were his people. He had ordered them into battle. He had asked them to die so that others could live. He would carry that weight for the rest of his life. Dr. Hae-won was struggling in different ways. She had spent 3 years building trust with the Velthar, learning their culture, believing in the possibility of peace. All of that work had been destroyed in a matter of hours. She questioned whether her efforts had been worth anything. She questioned whether her belief in peaceful coexistence was foolish. One night, she found herself in the observation deck again, standing where the Admiral had stood so many times. Minho appeared beside her, as if sensing that she needed to talk. "I failed," Hae-won said without preamble. "Everything I worked for was a failure." "No," Minho replied firmly. "You showed that peace was possible. You demonstrated that humans and Velthar could live together. That is not a failure. That is evidence that my military action was necessary, because the Velthar chose greed over coexistence. That is on them, not on you." "But people died," Hae-won said, her voice breaking. 347 of your crew, thousands of civilians on Meridian Prime, and I did not prevent it." "You could not have prevented it," Minho said gently. "The Velthar made a choice to value resources more than they valued human life. We did not make that choice for them. We simply refused to accept the consequences of their choice without fighting back." Hae-won was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked the question that had been haunting her since the battle began. "Do you believe we made the right choice?" Minho looked out at the stars. He thought about the 50,000 people on the evacuation transports. He thought about the 347 crew members who had died. He thought about the 30,000 humans still left on Meridian Prime, probably dead or captured by now. "I believe we made the choice that preserves humanity's future," he said finally. "Whether it was right is something each person will have to decide for themselves." Back on the Aurora's Hope, Captain Jiwoo was preparing a presentation for the survivors. He wanted to document what had happened, to create a record that future generations could learn from. But he was struggling with how to tell the story without breaking apart emotionally. Young Captain Min-soo helped him organize the information. Together, they compiled records of the evacuation, interviews with survivors, and documentation of what had happened at each stage of the crisis. It would become one of the most important historical records in human military history. In her quarters, So-Jin was having a conversation with her daughter, Mi-Ra. The child was asking simple questions that did not have simple answers. "Where is Daddy?" Mi-Ra asked. So-Jin pulled her daughter close. "Daddy is in a place where he will always be watching over you," she said, which was the best answer she could give. "Is he coming home?" "No, baby. Daddy is not coming home." Mi-Ra did not fully understand. She was 3 years old, but she understood that something had changed, that the world was different, that her father was not coming back. On Earth, the news had arrived about what had happened at Meridian Prime. The human population was shocked and traumatized. They had believed they were on the path to peaceful coexistence with alien species. They had believed that the future would be one of cooperation and shared growth. Now they understood that the universe was not a kind place, that other species did not share human values, and that human survival might require a level of ruthlessness that humans had always considered barbaric. There were calls for immediate military mobilization. There were calls for retaliation against the Velthar. There were calls for the destruction of the alien species entirely. And there were calls for the Admiral to be tried for war crimes for attacking without permission from Earth's government. Admiral Minho received orders to return to Earth immediately. He was to be detained pending investigation into his military actions. The governments of Earth were in crisis. They did not know whether to celebrate Minho as a hero or prosecute him as a rogue military commander. The Indomitable began its slow journey home, its engines still operating at reduced capacity, its shields still offline, its weapons still partially damaged. The ship was a physical representation of the price that had been paid for humanity's survival. Lieutenant, now Captain Dawu, found the Admiral in his private quarters. The young officer was troubled. "Sir," Dawu began carefully, "I have received orders from Earth Command. They are questioning whether you have exceeded your authority. Some members of the government are very angry about the military action you took without their explicit approval." Minho nodded slowly. He had expected this. Governments always moved slowly. They always questioned everything. That was one of the weaknesses of human civilization. But it was also one of its strengths. Humans questioned authority in ways that other species did not. It was one of the things that made humanity special. "I understand," Minho said simply. "When we reach Earth, I will face whatever consequences they decide are appropriate. But I would make the same choice again." "Even knowing you might be prosecuted?" Dawu asked. "Even knowing that," Minho confirmed. "Because 50,000 people are alive because of that choice, and that matters more than my personal freedom." Dawu understood then, finally, what had driven the Admiral to make such radical decisions. It was not about military victory. It was not about proving humanity's strength. It was about the simple, fundamental belief that protecting the innocent was worth any personal cost. The young captain realized that he had just learned the most important lesson of his life. He had learned what real leadership was. It was not about being the smartest person in the room. It was not about being the strongest or the most aggressive. It was about being willing to sacrifice everything for those under your command. On the Aurora's Hope, So-Jin was writing in a journal, documenting her experiences. She was creating a record for her daughter, so that Mi-Ra would someday understand what had happened, why she did not have a father, and why they had been forced to leave their home. "Your father was a brave man," she wrote. "He died fighting so that you and thousands of other children could live. That is his legacy. That is what he wants you to remember about him." The evacuation transports continued their journey home, carrying with them the weight of grief, the burden of survival, and the knowledge that humanity had forever changed. The easy times were over. The times of peace and exploration were done. Now humanity understood that the universe was filled with danger, and that standing up against that danger would require sacrifice. But they also understood that standing up was possible, that humans had the strength to fight, that humans had the will to survive. And that was a lesson the rest of the galaxy would eventually learn as well.